Well, our subject this afternoon is cannabis, a subject which is of interest to large numbers of people, though it's rarely discussed, and in fact seems to have attained the status of somewhat of a taboo in polite society. My interest in it is intense and lifelong, I must say. I remember when I first encountered it, within a few minutes of my first exposure to it, I realized that I was going to be able to self-medicate myself to normalcy. I was, as an adolescent, what's called a nervous child, and sort of had a personal style that was very hard driving and, I'm told, fairly abrasive. And it really came with the force of a revelation that the mere smoking of a small amount of vegetable material could completely invert the structures of my personality and socialize me, as it were, into a reasonably functioning member of the community in which I found myself. I first encountered cannabis in Berkeley in this Easter vacation of 1965, and it took a couple or three exposures to it before I really sorted out what it was doing for me, and I brought to it all the programming that my middle-class straight parents had given me concerning the subject, that this was the weed of death, that the road to hell was paved with this particular substance. But I also had been exposed to some of the literature of the Beat generation, the writings of Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac, and some of those people. And within just a few months, I had integrated it into my lifestyle as really the central practice of my life, and it has remained so up until just 2 or 3 months ago, when, under the pressure of my apparently dissolving marriage, I stopped smoking in order to see really what sort of effect it would have. I was in the sort of absurd position of being in psychotherapy with a woman who I respected very much and who seemed to be a very skilled psychotherapist, except that she had no sophistication whatsoever about cannabis, and the therapeutic process kept looping back to the issue of my cannabis ingestion. And she would ask me, well, now, how many times a day do you do this? I would say 10 to 14. And she would say, and how many years have you been doing this? Well, 25, 26, 27. And finally I saw that it was impeding the therapeutic process, not in its physical effects, but in its effects on her attitude toward me. So I determined simply to stop in order to remove this issue from the menu of issues that we were dealing with in this therapeutic process. And I'm happy to report that though I was at that time the heaviest and most continuous cannabis user I have ever known or heard of, it was no big deal. I simply stopped smoking it and took up reading in the evenings, and it seemed to have no impact on my psychological organization at all, except that, I must say, my dream life became considerably more interesting in the wake of that decision. And over the years in my traveling, when there have been times when for just a few days my access to cannabis was interrupted, I noticed this same phenomenon, that in the absence of cannabis the dream life seems to become much richer. This causes me to sort of form a theory, just for my own edification, that cannabis must in some sense thin the boundary between the conscious and unconscious mind, and I sort of imagine the unconscious as a system under hydraulic pressure, and if you smoke cannabis, the energy which would normally be channeled into dreams is instead manifest in the reveries of the cannabis intoxication. The reason that I've smoked it so assiduously over the years is very simply that it seems to dissolve a local and personalistic perspective. If I don't smoke cannabis, I worry about balancing my checkbook, the state of my immediate short-term career concerns. In other words, all the anxieties of the petty bourgeois pour in to claim my attention. If, on the other hand, I avail myself of cannabis, I'm able to rove and scan through a vast intellectual world that is composed of all the books I've ever read, all the people I've ever known, all the places I've ever been, in no particular order. I mean, what I really value about cannabis is the way in which it allows one to be taken by surprise by unexpected ideas. In the absence of cannabis, my creativity is a kind of brick by brick, linear extrapolation of certain concerns based on what I've just read or heard in conversation. If, on the other hand, I smoke cannabis, I can go in one moment from thinking about Goethe's color theory to, in the next moment, puzzling over a particular instance in Mayan historiography, or, the examples are endless. And I think that my experience is generalizable, specifically by looking at, for instance, the architectural and art historical motifs of areas of the world where cannabis has been institutionalized for thousands of years. What we call Oriental extravagance is in fact the patina of design motifs and literary conventions that have been laid over ordinary experience in places like Bengal, the Punjab, and across the Middle East. Islam is a civilization, to my mind, largely, though perhaps unconsciously, under the influence of the visions and the attitudes imparted by hashish. When I attempt to analyze in the broadest sense what the influence that cannabis has on myself and on large groups of people who use it, it is that it seems to exert a kind of feminizing influence. It's a boundary-dissolving drug, but a very gentle boundary-dissolving drug. It doesn't dissolve boundaries in the spectacular way that the mega hallucinogens do. Of all the drugs that have been used by mankind over the centuries, I would venture to argue that cannabis is the most benign.